All right, I believe we are live here on YouTube, and thanks to everybody for watching. You can also watch this back and listen on our podcast network as well. Clayton Sayfie with Chris Balas and Austin Fox. We're from thewolverine.com. We appreciate everybody for checking out our coverage this year on Michigan basketball there. If you want to become a premium subscriber, you can use the promo code BLUE60 for 2 months for free. So, guys, we'll try to put a positive spin on what was a horrible night, but a positive spin on the season in general. I wanted to start with this. I was kind of thinking about a lot of things this morning and late last night when you look at, I'm sitting there at that Oakland game in overtime back in, December. And if someone would have told me, hey, this team's you're going to be devastated. Michigan fans will be devastated on March 31st after an Elite Eight loss, I would have said, okay, I'll take that. I'll take a Big Ten championship. But at the same time, somebody put this pretty nicely on our message board this morning that expectations are fluid. They did a lot of good things. They showed that they did have more talent than maybe some people thought. The coaching was a lot better than I think a lot of people thought. No one thought Juwan Howard would be National Coach of the Year. Not that they ruled it out, but so just any thoughts on that before we dive into the game? Just the fact that it is this tough, but that's almost kind of a good thing in a way to have those expectations.
Yeah, you aren't putting a positive spin on last night. Period. End of story, man.
Yeah, no.
But to about the season, man, the fact that you are disappointed about not making a Final Four after where you were and what the expectations were before the season. We had no idea that Mike Smith was going to be so good a lot of the time and running the point, that Shawnee Brown was going to be such a valuable contributor, that Hunter Dickinson was going to be as good as he was, but that all played out. And that's a big part of the reason that they had the success that they did and pushed a lot of the right buttons. So a Big Ten championship's a Big Ten championship. You hung a banner, and that is in a year in which the Big Ten was supposedly great. And I think we saw at the end it was probably a little bit overrated. And maybe part of that was because we didn't have a whole lot of non-conference season to judge up on. But you take that, man. And National Coach of the Year honors, well-deserved for Juwan Howard. I think he showed last night he's still learning a little bit, and he did learn, especially on that last shot. They didn't wait till the last second, and they actually got 2 or 3 more opportunities because of that. Remember the Ohio State game when they took it right down and played for one? I didn't think that was the right strategy at the time. I thought they did a much better job. Would have liked Shawnee Brown maybe getting a couple more touches there down the stretch. But all told, man, what a great year for Michigan basketball. The future looks bright. This is going to be a vastly different looking team going forward, fellas. And there's some excitement there and there's some trepidation because we don't know what to expect when you get some new blood in there. And you're going to miss a lot of these guys. They were really a lot of fun to watch.
The coaches drew up some pretty decent plays last night to put guys in position to make plays. Franz Wagner had that open three. Mike Smith had a good look from three, but they just didn't execute down the stretch. But again, it's all about perspective. Coming into the year, this Michigan team was picked by a lot of people to finish 7th or even 8th in the Big Ten. Expectations weren't that high, and point guard and center were 2 of the big reasons why Mike Smith and Hunter Dickinson exceeded all expectations. If you would have told someone 2 years ago that Juwan Howard would make the Elite Eight and win the Big Ten championship in his second year on the job, I think every single Michigan fan everywhere would have taken that. So, yes, last night's loss stings a lot, but it doesn't put a damper on what this team achieved as a whole this season.
Yeah, and at the same time, we kind of talked about this in our show yesterday, how when you do have that team that ends up being the one that can get there, you got to seize that opportunity and get to that Final Four. So it kind of feels like a Final Four that was left on the table for Michigan, and they don't come all that often. I mean, Michigan was fortunate, and it took some nice bounces of the basketball in 2013 and 2018 to even get there. They needed a couple bounces here last night. Let's just talk about that game and get a little more in-depth. The offense obviously was the problem. The defense was outstanding, I thought, for much of the game, obviously other than Juzang kind of going off. And, I thought they should have put Franz Wagner on him. At the same time, you shut down just about everybody else. Juzang had 28 of their 51. Took him 19 shots. He was 11 to 19. But so speaking of the offense, I mean, nobody wanted to take a shot. When they did take a shot, nobody was making any shots. And we talked about this before we went live. Like, that offense is just guys sitting there like, ready to feed the post and not moving the ball like they have all season, which is why they were at that point. We saw great ball movement against Florida State. We saw great ball movement against LSU. UCLA, give them credit for playing better defensively than they have probably all season, but you played right into their hands, and I also thought the pace was right into their hands as well because they wanted the least amount of possessions as possible in that game. That's exactly what they got. 51-49. Didn't feel like the formula there.
That was terrible. And we can talk about bounces of the ball, but it should never have come to that. You're up 11-4, number one, and off to a pretty good start. But they had an opportunity early on in that game when UCLA wasn't making anything. I don't know how many shots in a row they missed, but to really extend the lead, and then they're going to have to play a little bit more to your pace. I thought Michigan should have forced the pace a little bit more. Number one. Number two, I hate it when they stop and just look inside like, okay, everybody's going to stand and watch. That's not how you do it. And that's when they haven't won this year, and when the offense has gotten stagnant, that's what they've done. I don't have any problem playing inside out within the framework of your offense and ball movement. So I really thought that they should have drawn up a few more things for Shawnee Brown. He was the one guy that was actually playing with a little bit of swagger on offense. Franz Wagner was not. Putting the ball in his hands at the end of the game, I was like, man, you could tell he didn't want it. The moment was too big for him, and I don't think there's any shame in that. That's something that's probably going to change as it comes with experience, and maybe it's going to be in the NBA or the G League or whatever it is, because it sounds like he's not coming back. But man, what a note to end on your Michigan career, because that's what a lot of people will remember, the untapped potential, the unfulfilled promise of what could have been. Fair or not, that's just the way it works, right? And you're thinking, okay, kind of like Darius Morris back in the day when he missed that last shot against Duke. It was a floater, and he had a great year. And you're thinking, that's all right, he'll come back and you'll have more opportunities to it doesn't work that way anymore, guys. And that's the disappointing part about it. But I'll say this. It was hard to watch. It was not fun to watch. It was like, let's get through this. And I think I wrote that I've had, more enjoyable root canals than sitting through a game like that. It set the game back a little bit. And when you're watching, I was there firsthand behind the hoop, and you're watching UCLA celebrate a Final Four, and you're thinking, man, this just isn't right. They really, really missed an opportunity. What John Beeline always used to say, and people get mad when we talk about Beeline, but you know what? The way we talk about Beeline is the way you talk about Bo Schembechler and things he said, because he was a wise guy, right, and a great coach. But he said, when you get these opportunities, go make the most of them, because you don't know when you're going to be back. We think that the program is going to continue to ascend, and he's recruiting at a high level, but you just never know. It takes some, like you said, it takes some bounces of the ball. So not getting that Final Four banner when it's right there, and you're playing an 11 seed that want to play in game, you got to take advantage of those opportunities.
All throughout the year, Michigan was one of the best three-point shooting teams and one of the best free throw shooting teams in the entire country, and they struggled mightily in both areas last night. They only hit 3 threes for the game. They took 11 attempts, and they also struggled from the free throw line. They only made 6 of their 11 attempts. Shawnee Brown was one of the few guys who was hot from 3, and that's, again, why I would have liked to have seen him got a better look at the end. This was one of the worst offensive games that Michigan played all year, and it's a shame that obviously it had to come at a time like this. It was the third fewest points Michigan had ever scored in an NCAA tournament game, so that kind of puts it in perspective. Behind the 44 they scored against Texas Tech in John Beeline's last game in 2019, and 43 they scored against Holy Cross all the way back in 1948. So again, that really puts it in perspective. In March and in the NCAA tournament specifically, you have to hit big shots in big games like this, and you have to be able to score at a high level. It doesn't matter how good your defense is. If you can't hit shots, you're not going to win games, and Michigan just wasn't able to do that last night.
I do want to say that you can't, and all the comparison to Texas Tech, yeah, but Beeline, that was an elite defensive team, and UCLA, you can give them credit for playing well defensively if you want to. That's not a good defensive team. That's a decent defensive team. Mick Cronin's teams play more defense than UCLA used to. Let's put it that way. We'll credit them for that. But I think they were 54th nationally coming in, if I'm not mistaken. You got to be better than that. And I really felt the moment was too big for a lot of these guys. Mike Smith wasn't close on most of his shots. He hit a big 3 down the stretch, and that was the case in a few big games this year for him. As good as he was most of the year, that's when you eat, man, is when the lights are on you. That's when you really got to show up. So it just seemed to me like I don't know if they were. I don't want to say they were looking past UCLA. They didn't seem to have that bounce in their step though from the get go, and they seemed to really lose their confidence throughout the game to the point that you're like, who wants to score when you are begging Austin Davis to get a touch? I'm thinking this might be your best opportunity to score. Then you got an issue, and that's nothing against Big Country, man. But I'm thinking, okay, who wants it, man? Who really wants it? And I thought of two guys. I thought Shawnee Brown, and I thought Austin Davis. And Eli Brooks, I thought panicked on that putback. He wasn't really aware of the situation and the time. So, but hey, man, again, it's going to be tough to get the taste out of your mouth after this one, but you have to look at the entire body of work, and they'll still be hanging a banner next year, and the future still looks bright.
Yeah, I actually wrote that in my 5 takeaways was that Shawnee Brown and Austin Davis were the two guys that actually had,
Really?
what did you say, a bounce in their step or kind of more of a purpose or played like they normally do, which is all you really needed in this game. You mentioned kind of like guys didn't want to shoot. I mean, it was, it felt like they'd done this at times this year, and I think they were lost without Livers at certain times, a guy who hunts shots and did a great job of that, especially, second half of last year when he was healthier, and then this year, where he's just like, hey, if I'm open, I'm pulling that thing. They needed to do that more, especially against, UCLA is not a good defensive team, but they have good defensive principles under, Mick Cronin, where you're going to drive in traffic and take a worse shot. It's like, dude, take the shot you have, and try to make that. Now, I will say then, that comes to the problem where without Livers, this team doesn't have a shooter. They have guys that can shoot, but they don't have an actual shooter on the floor. Isaiah Livers is one of the most elite ones I've seen at Michigan, if not the best in really my lifetime, because of 3 years of shooting in the mid 40 percentages from three. His sophomore year, he was 50% from three in Big Ten play. That's incredible. So, not making the excuse that Livers wasn't there. They were without a player too, that they lost way earlier in the season, but you could just tell that he would have won them that game. I mean, certainly, but that's not who was out there, and they still should have won without him. We want to get to people's questions in the comments here. We got a couple. One person, obviously this is going to be something we were going to talk about anyway, but Jake Mara is wondering who's projected to return next year. So I guess if we want to talk about kind of that now, because Isaiah Livers is obviously gone and he'll go to the NBA. You mentioned earlier, Chris, that Franz Wagner is likely to go. I'm looking at mocks, and he's in the top 10. He's in the top 15. I wonder what last night will do for that. I think that they'll probably look at more of the big picture, and it won't really hurt him too much in general. And then the big ones are Shawnee Brown, Eli Brooks, Mike Smith, possibly Austin Davis. That'd be a 6th year. He's been here a long, long time. What are your guys' thoughts? I mean, could last night have been, maybe what they needed to, give them that little push to come back because they want to achieve more?
Man, it's easy for me to say that if I were Franz Wagner, I'd come back, and I would never want to leave on that note, but it's just not reality. If you're projected to be a top 20 pick, and I'm guessing that will be, what leads him to the NBA, and I'm guessing he'll still be a top 20 guy. They draft on potential. And to me, you look at his shot, he shoots from his navel at times. Nice. And he's got to develop a left hand. He can put it on the floor. He's 6'9.5", close to 6'10" at this point, and can do some things. But there's a long way to go there. He's an elite college player, especially defensively, and that's what I loved about him. And you'd love to see him come back and follow in his brother's footsteps. Maybe his brother says, "Hey, man, I did 3. Why don't you do 3?" But I think it was a foregone conclusion before the year that this was going to be his last year. I don't see that changing. I think Mike Smith, as we talked about in a story a couple of days ago, has job opportunities waiting for him, elite job opportunities that Columbia grads and Michigan students and grads get. And he's got them lined up, so wouldn't surprise me. We asked Eli Brooks last night in the post game, and he said he's going to talk about it with his family. Europe is going to be a real option for him, and he's been here a long time, gone through a lot of stuff. So it wouldn't surprise for him to see him move on. So frankly, it wouldn't surprise to see all these guys move on at this point. And you're starting fresh next year. I would love to see the guards come back and groom some of the young guys. ease Zeb Jackson into it, Frankie Collins, Kobe Buffkin, and these guys, but could be a really, really young team next year, fellas.
Just real quick, Europe is interesting this year because is Europe,
Great
you
point.
know, as much of an option? I'm not exactly sure what's going on in terms of pro basketball over there, but with travel and everything else, it could almost be like, hey, just do one more year. That opportunity is going to be there in a year. At the same time, we've talked about this before, that Eli Brooks has been through a ton at Michigan. He's been a warrior, hell of a kid to be able to cover and watch over the last 4 years. So, it's such a unique year, and they didn't come into the year thinking they were going to have this opportunity or come into, their senior year thinking they'd have one more year. I would not blame a kid for not coming back. At the same time, like you said, it's easy for us to say, I would probably, but at the same time, to each his own, it is what it is.
Yeah,
I
you're not 6'10" either, and so you need a little work on your jumper. Go ahead, Austin.
Exactly. It's easy for me to say from afar, but if I were in some of these guys' shoes, especially those who don't have an NBA future, man, I would come back and get that one more year of basketball in, especially a guy like Eli Brooks or a Mike Smith. Again, guys who likely don't have NBA futures, Austin Davis as well for that matter. Eli Brooks addressed it a little bit after last night's game. He said obviously it has been a topic that he's already talked about with his family because it's a huge decision. He has not come to a conclusion yet, but we'll talk it over here in the coming weeks with his family and teammates. It would be absolutely huge for this Michigan basketball team to get any of these seniors back next year, whether that's a Smith or Brooks or Davis or Brown or whoever it may be, just to have that veteran presence and that leadership on a what's likely to be a pretty young team next year with a lot of roster turnover on it.
You know what I love is the all the fans are there. I can't wait to get rid of these guys. We'll get some real talent in here and so on and so forth. And it's like, man, you take the proven thing every day and twice on Sunday, and you can rip on Mike Smith if you want to. And yeah, he had a tough time, but this is a guy who led them to the Elite Eight and within a breath of the Final Four. And a lot of the reason they got there was because of him. So it was he had a fantastic year, and you can say the same thing for all these guys. So what they did collectively as a team, there is some NBA talent there. And then when Livers went down, to get to the Elite Eight after Livers went down, I said Sweet 16, as a one seed without Livers would be really good, would be good. Anything after that is a little bit of gravy, but then you get selfish when you get that 11 seed, and that's the tough part. But credit these guys, man, for the run they made, and for Juwan Howard for leading them where they did. Fantastic season.
Yeah, and again, we can't put a positive spin on last night, even if the optimist that you guys call me, can try. But some people, and this doesn't matter. I picked LSU. I think Michigan to win by 2 or whatever. Like, so let's say they lost that game, which was a toss-up coming in because Michigan wasn't playing well. They're without Livers. No one knew how long of a run they can go on, as you just mentioned. If they would have lost that, then we're talking about a completely different thing. So they actually got here, and then the clunker came in the Elite Eight in a game. Like we said, expectations are fluid. Like, they should have beat that UCLA team, but at the same time, if they would have played decent and lost to LSU, then you're going out, with the round of 32 loss. You're still with all these rest of the Big Ten teams that went home. So you got to kind of put things in perspective just a little bit. Chris, you wrote about this. I think it was a prediction in your post-game column about next year's team being more athletic, and I agree with that because you look at some of the guys they're bringing in with the Moussa Diabates, the Frankie Collins, who's one of the more athletic point guard recruits probably that I've seen. And, again, I would take those proven guys, but what are your thoughts maybe on what the complexion of this team will look like? I think if Brandon Johns is willing to stick around, that he's the favorite right now. He's the leader in the clubhouse, in my opinion, to win that 4 job based on what he did. And, man, he was another bright spot in that first half, kind of kept them in the game last night.
Yeah, and you hope that Diabate will develop and become elite in his first year, but you never know. With these 5-star kids, it's hit and miss. Look how many transfer. Guys that were so good, and then they didn't pan out, so they're ended up. I mean, Gonzaga's got one, right, a Florida transfer, and you look at. There are just no guarantees. So, but I do love the makeup of the future team. You just don't know how quick quickly it's going to click. Frankie Collins is a guy who can break anybody down off the dribble. What you need is that alpha man, and that's another thing that I wrote is who's going to get you that bucket at the end of a game, right? And people said, well, Isaiah Livers could be that guy. He was never really a guy that's going to put it on the floor and go get you two if you need it. Now, he could do a lot of things, but that wasn't his game. Franz Wagner wasn't the guy. Mike Smith clearly wasn't the guy. So who was it? There wasn't one. So that's what I think you're going to be getting in the near future. Frankie Collins, you hope that he develops his jumper a little bit more. Maybe Kobe Buffkin. You saw him play in live.
I like his game a lot. I like his game a lot.
Yep, and you can get him in some ball screens, and he can break guys down off the dribble too. So you're going to have more of that. And that's going to help because when teams are going to pack it in and be able to switch on you all the time, then you're going to have issues like you had last night. And I don't think that's going to be the case going forward.
Yeah, I love this class they have coming in. Obviously, it's number one in the country, but at the same time, I don't think a lot of college basketball fans realize that there are a lot of growing pains with the five-star freshmen and the elite freshmen that programs bring in around the country. Kentucky was a great example of that this past year, struggling the way they did despite having the number one class. We've seen it countless times over the years. Freshmen very seldom come in and average 13 and 5 boards a game or put up stats like that. So I'll take experience every day of the week over elite freshmen, but at the same time, I do like the guys that Michigan has coming in: Houston, Diabate, Kobe Buffkin. I think a lot of people think Isaiah Barnes is a bit of an underrated guy. When you have the mix of elite youngsters and veterans, kind of like Michigan did this past year, is when you see the really, really good teams around college basketball. So that's why I think it would be crucial for Michigan to get one of these seniors back once again next year. But at the same time, it is easy to be really excited about the future with the class Juwan Howard is coming in.
Yeah, a couple more things, and that's kind of going right off of what you said, Austin, is we got Jake Miner here wondering about possible transfers. I don't know if Marcus Carr would necessarily be in play, but Chris, you wrote about this the other day. Fats Russell and Christian Lander, a couple guys. I'd much rather have Fats Russell, guy with experience, as opposed to getting just another young guard that's basically the same age as Frankie Collins and these guys. I think if you can't get Eli Brooks or you can't get Mike Smith back, getting a veteran guy like you did with Mike Smith or even Sean D. Brown this past year would be very, very valuable for this team. It's kind of a fine line you got to balance here with guys coming in who committed and signed, forget the exact timeline, but not knowing necessarily that these guys are all going to be given extra years. You don't necessarily want to bring in transfers over guys, but at the same time, you have to win. So, I think Fats Russell would be a good addition. What do you guys think about maybe pursuing some guards?
The Toledo point guard, I forget his name, just declared yesterday he was the MAC Player of the Year. I like the thought of those guys coming in because they're so hungry, and that's another thing that Beeline, the analyst, said was these are guys that really want to win at the highest level, and they still have that desire to go out and win. Marcus Carr is a shot hunter. I don't think, first of all, he's going to come back for another. I think he's going to test the NBA waters and maybe go G League. That's from what we've heard. I don't like the Big Ten to Big Ten transfer. To me, there's just something wrong about it. And, I'm not saying you shouldn't be, and if the rules permit it, but I don't like it. And I never really liked Marcus Carr's game because I thought he was just out there jacking and looked like he was playing in a YMCA game. And I don't think that fits what they want to do. But a Fats Russell, I think, is a possibility. They are pursuing him. I would imagine they're going to pursue the Toledo kid. Austin, look it up with the kid's name. I think it's Marion or something like that. And Monroe, I was up late last night, but we saw him play, and he's out there and has been contacted by a ton of elite teams already. So I think they'll look at him.
Marion Jackson, and Eli shut him down. Down. So
yes, he did. Yep. So, but to me, and I wrote it. It starts, in my opinion, with Mike Smith and Eli Brooks. That's who you recruit if you're Juwan Howard first. I don't think Mike Smith has to be a 35-minute point guard next year. I think Frankie Collins, you groom him with Mike Smith and say, hey, Mike, come on back and let's do this one more time, and get a taste of what it's like to play in front of the fans at Chrysler, because that's what these guys missed out on, man. and you really didn't get the full Michigan experience. So Franz Wagner did, obviously, but you want a couple of those guys to come back. But yeah, they are looking at the portal, and they're going to continue to look at the portal, as they should, because we saw how much it helped this team this year with Brown and with Mike Smith. Man, those guys were a big part of the reason that this team accomplished what it did this year.
Yeah, Marion Jackson and that Toledo team were extremely good this past year, and I think a lot of people forget Michigan blew them out way back in late November, early December. But I do like the mid-major guys who put up big numbers, more so than some of these power conference guys, if you will, like Marcus Carr. I don't like the Big Ten to Big Ten transfer aspect either. We saw it yesterday with Jamari Wheeler from Penn State transferring to Ohio State. Mike Smith obviously panned out transferring here from a small school, but I think oftentimes that's the exception. It oftentimes doesn't work out as well as it did with him. Jerron Simmons from Ohio a few years ago, I think, is a good example of that. So I watched a lot of Marcus Carr this past year, and like Chris said, he's a shot hunter. He took a lot of wild shots and crazy shots, so I won't be surprised if he's not an option. Fats Russell, I believe from Rhode Island, I think would be a better option as well. But as far as the transfer portal goes, you have to hit it hard nowadays with how many guys are transferring and how many programs around the country are building at least a portion of their team off of transfers. The amount of outstanding players in the transfer portal is absolutely insane when you look at the amount of guys who are leaving their respective programs nowadays. So I think Juwan Howard realizes that with how active he has been in it just over the past year or so. And I think that we're going to see him continue to be because, again, that's basically the state of college basketball nowadays.
Last thing before we go, looking at the Final Four, it would have been an interesting, I was trying to project, watching Gonzaga last night, what the Michigan-Gonzaga line would have been if that was the matchup in the Final Four. 7, 8. I mean, Gonzaga they're going to be double-digit favorites on UCLA, obviously, considering Michigan was, 7.5 on UCLA. I think Gonzaga rolls to the title. You got Baylor and Houston on the other side. I think it'll be Baylor-Gonzaga, and I wouldn't be surprised if Gonzaga wins the next couple pretty decisively. They got a great mix of pros with, Kispert and Suggs and just really good college players like Timmy, who was going off last night flexing too, and that kind of offended some people. But, yeah, what are you guys' thoughts on the Final Four?
I like Baylor's defense, and I'd like to see that game. I think we all do. Yeah, if Michigan's not going to be there, I think Gonzaga. Michigan might have played with nothing to lose against Gonzaga, but without Isaiah Livers, they weren't going to beat that team most likely. Probably 95 times out of 100, Gonzaga would win that game without Livers on the floor. The way they play, the way they're playing now, maybe that's a little high, but that's a really good basketball team. Saw them last night before the Michigan game, and was just really impressed with what they did to USC and what they've done most of the year. So looks like they're going to be have a chance to be the undefeated team that the first undefeated team since '76, Indiana. But man, their expectations there, there's the weight on your shoulders. Remember Kentucky against Wisconsin, so they get a break by getting to play a UCLA team that's just not very good. I'm sorry to say, 51 points. That was ridiculous that you lose holding a team to 51 points. But, it's basically a one-man show if you've got a decent defense or a good defense. Michigan could have won that game 49-48 or something like that if they'd done just a little bit better job earlier on Juzang and not let him go off like they did and get some open looks. But tip your hat to the kid. I like Gonzaga and Baylor. I think Baylor will give them a game. I think that'll be a pretty good one. Although, watch now. The way I've been predicting games, guys, Houston will freaking upset Baylor in the Final Four.
I think I saw a stat. This is the first Final Four in history that there are no teams east of the Mississippi in it. So this just feels odd having an 11 seed in UCLA in it, and even Houston to a lesser degree. I know they're a 2 seed, but I agree. I think Gonzaga is going to blow out UCLA. I got Baylor over Houston, then that would set up the Gonzaga-Baylor matchup that so many people predicted prior to this NCAA tournament. Most thought they were the two best teams throughout the entire year. I've got Gonzaga. How do you not pick them at this point? They're basically rolling through everybody. They destroyed a red-hot USC team last night. And, yeah, like Chris said, I think it would cap off the first undefeated season in college basketball since 1976. Plenty of teams in recent years had entered the NCAA tournament undefeated, but nobody could finish the job. Kentucky in 2015, Wichita State in 2014. But I think Gonzaga gets it done and wins it all, even though this is obviously not a typical year, and they didn't play as many games as some of the other undefeated teams throughout the regular season did in recent years.
Man, you're talking like an East Coast coastal elite, not wanting these West Coast teams in there. But yeah, I think Michigan was the only team east of the Mississippi in the Elite Eight too, which is incredible. Yeah, what a year! What a year, 2021. But it is what it is. In Michigan, a hell of a season. Didn't end on the right note, obviously, but most teams in college basketball, they lose their last game, right? So it is what it is. Any other final thoughts before we move on here and wrap up?
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't make my bed. I was tired. It was late. So that's it for me.
Yeah, me too. I'm just it's just disappointing after the way this season ended. But again, I think it's important to keep things in perspective and how impressive this year and how dominant this Michigan team was, still making it to the Elite Eight with Isaiah Liver. So again, I'm not going to let last night's loss put a damper on what Juwan Howard and this team achieved this year.
It'll just take a little bit of time, I think, for Michigan fans, and you're already kind of seeing that, people like, shouting out and screw the people that are coming after these players too on social media. Saw a little bit of that, and Mo Wagner sticking up for his brother on Instagram last night. So
no, they're not. They're not above criticism. Let's put it that way. But at the same point, when you make it personal, you need to get a life.
100%. They can be criticized. We did some fair criticism here, obviously. But yeah, I agree. 100% personal stuff and the stuff even you saw with Ohio State and EJ Liddell is ridiculous. So don't do that. We don't want you watching our videos if you do that. But that is it. Hell of a Michigan basketball season. Big Ten champs. That is a wrap. Hell of a time to cover it. Use the promo code BLUE60 at thewolverine.com. We'll still be covering it. We'll still be looking at who's going to come back, possible transfers in. You want all that inside information at thewolverine.com. Free trial. Stick with us with promo code BLUE60.